Hi, I'm Nancy Harhut, and you're listening to A Shark's Perspective.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Kinney, but friends call me Shark. I'm a keynote speaker, a strategist, a shark diver, host of this show, and your chief shark officer. If you're trying to get better performance out of your marketing, then you obviously need to take a lot of factors into account. A lot of it's getting the right message to the right person at the right time. But when it's still not performing well enough, then what do? More content, more social, or more advertising? Or is it voodoo and magic parlor tricks? Or maybe it's also putting that same message the right way, in a way that's brain friendly. And if you wanted to lead into instinctive responses, then how would you use behavioral science in marketing? A three-time guest you may remember from episodes 85 and 171, Nancy Harhut is a creative marketer, a behavioral scientist, a speaker, and the author of Using Behavioral Science in Marketing, Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Responses. And on this episode, we'll discuss some three-peat Bostonians, human behavior triggers, ham, bacon, and turkey, really bad behavioral science jokes, a lot of research in a book, marketing that's brain-friendly, talking the right way to an audience without talking over them, behavioral science and storytelling, economist and the information gap theory, being curious and going beyond the who, what, when, where, how, and who, labeling and framing, the effects of social media and how social proof affects behavior, time, swimming or not in Cape Cod, Zagarnik and Von Restorff, hanging out in Beantown, great fried foods, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a behavioral scientist with a shark who is out early on good behavior on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Nancy, welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. Welcome to a three-peat. Tell us a brief overview of your background, your career to date. I know everybody's heard it on episodes 85 and 171, but tell us where you are in the world with what you're doing.
Shark, thanks so much for having me back. I am delighted to be here. So you know what? I started my career as a copywriter, primarily in agencies doing direct response copywriting, rose up through the ranks, became a creative director. About 6 years ago, co-founded my own shop, HBT Marketing. It's a boutique agency. And what we do is we focus on applying behavioral science to marketing best practices. And what that basically means is, behavioral science is the study of how people make decisions. Marketers obviously need people to make decisions. Behavioral scientists have found that there are certain decision-making shortcuts that people routinely rely on. And as marketers, if we can get out ahead of that, we can use that to our advantage. We can use what science has found about how people behave in order to influence that behavior. So that's what I specialize in. And I just published a book called Using Behavioral Science in Marketing.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay, all right. Well,
you're jumping ahead.
I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah.
All right. Don't want to jump ahead. But anyway, so that's who I am these days. I am the Chief Creative Officer and co-founder at HBT Marketing. HBT stands for Human Behavior Triggers, because we're all about adding those human behavior triggers into the work we do for our clients.
It is not ham, bacon, turkey.
It is not ham, bacon, turkey. Nope.
Sorry, I wasn't sure. So you're in the exclusive three-peat club. There'll be a ceremony later, a green jacket, the whole 9 yards. But most of the three-peaters I've had on the show seem to all have come from Boston, which is a weird trend with Tamsin and Tom and other friends of ours. Huh. But I once tried a behavioral science joke on you that didn't land. So hopefully you've long forgotten about it because it was that bad of a joke. But as a former stand-up, I need a chance to recover. So I'm going to give you these real quick. How do you know Santa Claus is a real person?
I don't know. How do you know Santa Claus is a real person?
He suffers from present bias.
Oh, I like it.
It's getting a little bit better. Why was the neuroscience movie rated R?
Why was the neuroscience movie rated R?
Because it had prefrontal nudity.
Oh.
These are not great, okay? They're only just bad behavioral science jokes. What do you call a sociologist who is just okay at their job?
What do you call a sociologist who's just okay at their job?
A sociologist.
I'm
here all week, and I've already convinced you to try the veal. All right, so let's talk about the book and what's really important. Using Behavioral Science in Marketing to Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Responses. You wasted so much time on those jokes. I wanted to get to this book, but let's talk a little bit about it in all seriousness. This is an incredible book. I am thoroughly impressed. Tell me a little bit about what the impetus was that drove you into this. You and I have talked about these same topics for years, but what drove you to write this brilliant 270 something page book?
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your kind words. I really appreciate them because that's high praise coming from you. And what drove me to write it was, I think, just like you, I'm a big believer in behavioral science, and I've been using it for my clients. I've been seeing it work. I speak about it at different conferences, and people will come up to me like a year or two or three later and say, I saw you, 2 years ago at this conference, tried some of the stuff you suggested, and it worked. And so that always felt good, and obviously not everything is going to work for everyone, but I heard that often enough that I thought it would be great if I could get the word out to more people. I mean, I can only work with a certain number of people. I can only speak at a certain number of conferences. And I'm such a believer in behavioral science that I wanted any marketer, big or small, solopreneur or, somebody in a large company or a large agency to be able to tap into these resources because they're easy to apply and they can be incredibly effective. So thought, you know what, I have an opportunity to write a book. I'm going to do it. And, if people are interested, they'll be able to tap into it. And if not, I'll fail miserably, but hey, at least I'll have done it.
Well, and you got praise from quite a few really smart people. I was thrilled to be one of those mentioned. I noticed you ranked Chris Brogan's praise, Robert Cialdini, and Mark Schaefer's praise slightly above mine. I won't hold that against you.
I'll have to speak to the publisher about that. Let me make a note of it.
Yeah, they're fantastic people. There's so much wonderful praise in there. Tamsin Webster, Ann Hanley, lots of great folks. But why should someone, especially a marketer, read a book like this? Shouldn't they just rely on Google and Facebook and data to tell them everything? Because I love how you set this up about how human behavior and instinct really drives a lot of the action that a lot of marketers don't necessarily think of or forget about.
So I think there's probably like a twofold answer. So why should you read the book? Well, one reason is I've done a lot of the research for you. Marketers are notoriously busy. You and I are marketers. We're busy. Marketers are notoriously busy. I've, spent years kind of doing the research, collecting the case studies, doing the testing. And so I've saved you a lot of time if you're a marketer because I've compiled all of that for you. And then I think the other reason is a lot of times in marketing, we forget how people make decisions. We think if we can just get the right message to the right person at the right time, they'll give us the right response. And then when we don't quite get that right response or we don't get enough of it, we're like, and what we're forgetting is it's got to be the right message to the right person at the right time, the right way. And when I say the right way, what I mean is it's got to be a way that's brain friendly. Again, behavioral scientists have identified these decision-making shortcuts that people routinely rely on that we just default to. So why not use that to our advantage as marketers? And, as you read the book, you'll probably have a mixture of, oh, yeah, I do that. That's why it works. And, oh, wow, I never even thought to try that. Got to work it into my next campaign. So it's a nice balance of, I think, telling you why something might work, how you might be able to make it work better, and also giving you ideas that you maybe hadn't even thought of before that could really work for the particular product or service that you're promoting.
Well, I want to go back because I talk about this for marketers, but for all people, I want to bring it back a little bit in the sense that you and I just spoke at a conference last week for entrepreneurs. I speak at a lot of corporate association events, but a lot of times I think that, especially when we're talking about marketing, we often speak over the normal people running a business who don't have time to spend all day thinking about marketing and behavioral science or ad copy or anything else like that. Content marketing, sometimes we're just speaking over their heads. How can someone who's not a marketer take this and really apply it back to their regular business, especially if you're an entrepreneur who doesn't have a big team and they're wearing a lot of hats?
So that's a great point as well as a great question. And it's called using behavioral science in marketing as opposed to using behavioral science for marketers, because the truth is this is a great resource for anybody who needs to create or approve marketing. That might not be their sole job, their sole function. They might be, an entrepreneur. They might be in another area of a business, but somehow or the other, everybody needs to touch marketing. Marketing, a lot of people have said marketing is everybody's job in the company. And when you're a company of one, it's certainly part of your job too. And, the thing is, you don't have a lot of time to read up on it. You don't have a lot of time to study. You don't have a lot of time to, to try to figure things out. And if you can get a leg up by applying some of the tactics, the easy to apply tactics in the book, it'll put you out ahead of the competition. You'll spend a little bit less time trying to create marketing that's successful. You'll give yourself an advantage when you put the marketing messages out there, and that will allow you to turn your attention to the million other things that are on your plate that are required to successfully run a business.
And it's like when we talked last week as well, this is the kind of book that you can almost take and apply to a lot of different industries: realtors, fintech, medical, dental. So let's dive in a little bit further into the book and go to chapter 6. Elaborate, if you will, on how behavioral science can apply to storytelling.
Ah, sure, sure. So, and I'll just jump back to your previous point for just a second to say that there are lots of examples and case studies from B2B, B2C, not for profit, finance, education, telecom. I mean, I tried to get in as many different verticals as possible. So, to your point, if you're working in one of these verticals, you don't have to be a marketer. You just have to be in business, and you're going to find something useful. And then storytelling. So storytelling is interesting. Storytelling has become a bit of a buzzword, I think, in the industry.
You think?
But for good reason. I mean, stories are impactful, they're effective, they're persuasive. Way before the written word, stories were how information was passed from generation to generation. But there's kind of a brain science secret to storytelling, and that is stories affect your brain differently than facts and figures do. And sometimes when we're creating our marketing messages, when we're creating our advertising, we think we've got to get the facts and figures out there, the statistics and the speeds and the feeds, and all of that is important. But the truth of the matter is, people make decisions for emotional reasons, and then they later justify those decisions for rational reasons. The emotional reasons often come with a stories. Stories kind of stir up emotions. Stories are processed differently than rational thought is. Stories stick with you longer. There's a researcher from I want to say Princeton. His name is Hassan, Yuri Hassan, and he says that stories are the only way to take your idea and plant it in the brain of another person and make them think it's their own. Now, I'm, summarizing or what he said. Those aren't his exact words, but that is his thought. It is the only way you can basically take your idea, drop it into the head of your prospect, and make that prospect feel like it's their own. And that is an incredibly powerful tactic for someone to have if you're trying to do marketing. Because, hey, people may or may not listen to what someone else says, but they rarely argue with the conclusions that they draw. They really argue with themselves, right? So if they think it's their idea, they're much more likely to act on it.
I often talk about curiosity, so I really like chapter 9. And let's talk about the information gap theory, prompting consumers to take action through curiosity and the need to know. Unpack that, if you will.
Sure. So there's a neuroeconomist named George Lowenstein, and he's the one who actually coined the term information gap theory. But very simply, what it means is if there's a gap between what somebody knows and what they want to know, they'll take action to close the gap. And again, if we're trying to market our products and services, if we want people to do business with us, we need them to take action. So a great way to get people to do what we want them to do is to point out an information gap, to identify an area that somebody is interested in, pose a question that they don't know the answer to, but would like to know the answer to, and that will then prompt them to try to find that answer, to take the action to find the answer. A great way to do it is to use the 5 W's and the 1 H: who, what, where, when, why, and how. That's something I learned years ago when I was getting my journalism degree. But what they taught us in journalism school was if you write your newspaper stories and answer those questions, who, what, where, when, why, how, fairly early in the story, you'll get eyeballs, you'll get readership, because that's what people want to know. And it turns out that the same thing applies to advertising and marketing. People want to know the answers to who, what, where, when, why, how. And then you can actually go a little bit beyond that and talk about, things in terms of other superlatives: the best, the worst, the most, the least. But these are the things that people want to know. And there's some scientific evidence that suggests that the reward is in actually obtaining the information. Like our brain releases chemicals that make us feel good when we actually discover new information. So not only do we want to get the answer for purely practical reasons, but there's a physiological, a brain chemical reaction that we have when we discover something new. That feels great. And that then again fuels us to keep looking for answers to things that we don't have answers to.
Later on in chapter 12, you talk about labeling and framing. How do we apply this to help make people see things our way?
So labeling and framing is really interesting. So Researchers have found that when you label somebody as part of a particular group, they will start to behave as a member of that group, even if they hadn't previously thought of themselves as a member of that group previously. So researchers ran a study, I think it was in Chicago, and it was before an election was coming up. So they went and they interviewed a bunch of voting age people about the upcoming election, and they asked them about the issues on the ballot and the candidates on the ballot, and they talked to them about, their personal demographics and, all the kinds of things you would expect a researcher would ask you. And then what the researchers did is they arbitrarily, randomly assigned people into one of two groups. And they went to one of the groups and they said, you guys are the more politically active. So they labeled them as more politically active. And then they watched in the ensuing days as the election came up, and they saw that 15% more of the people who were told they were a member of the more politically active group, 15% more of those people showed up at the polls than the group that was not told they were politically active. And that was the only difference, because people were just randomly assigned one or the other group. But the label, hey, you're a more politically active person, was enough to make those people more likely to show up at the polls. So what this means to us is, if we sell a product, we might want to say, you're someone who has discerning taste in wine, or, you're somebody who really appreciates the cut of a fine suit, or, you label somebody as, you're somebody who's really concerned about the environment. You label somebody that way, and they will begin to behave in that fashion. So if you're somebody who really loves fine wine, well, you're probably going to buy the wine that I have for sale. Now, of course, the caveat is if you're selling, I don't know, really good grass-fed beef, and you're telling a vegetarian that they're a diehard carnivore, that's not going to work. Obviously, if you find the label objectionable, it's not going to have the same effect. But if it's neutral to positive, and you're told, hey, you're somebody who's responsible, or you're someone who's career-minded, people will start to behave that way. And then in terms of framing, behavioral scientists have found that the words that we choose to describe our products, our services, our companies actually influence the way people see them and the way they respond to them. So it's, the classic example is, this glass is half empty, this glass is half full. How I describe it to you influences how you see it and then how you respond to it. But there have been a lot of studies that show that just changing words, two words can kind of convey the same information, but you choose one or the other, and it can actually make a big difference in terms of people's response. So framing can be very powerful.
How much of social media was an impact on your research in this book? Because you talk a lot about social proofing in here as well. And I was thinking about how addicted we are to social media in the US compared to a lot of other countries. And I'm curious if that came up as a question or a concern or an afterthought in your research in regards to how much time we spend on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram versus what somebody in another country, say in Eastern Europe, for example, doesn't spend time on every day.
Yeah. So social media, and this is, the effects of social media are not my specialty per se, but it did come up somewhat in the book, only because social media is connecting us in ways that just we didn't have before. And so as a result, we're much more susceptible, I think, as you were saying, to social proof, because it's unavoidable. We open up our Twitter feed or our Facebook page, or we start to watch TikTok videos, and suddenly we're just bombarded with information that maybe we wouldn't have had access to before. And when we see people doing things or buying things or liking things, we start to feel that we too should buy those things, do those things, like those things. And these are, maybe people that we know, but very often people we don't know, people who live way far away from us. But because they're bringing these things to our attention, it does have an influence on us. So it can influence our purchasing habits. It can make us aware of things that we weren't aware of before. It can make us feel like we're losing out on things, or we're missing out on things. And we know that FOMO, fear of missing out, is a huge motivator. So there absolutely is an effect. There is definitely an effect of social media that we can leverage with behavioral science.
Whether or not it's something with 100,000 likes on TikTok, or Sally H. or John F. from Des Moines on a review site, I still find it fascinating how people you don't have a clue if they're anything like you at all have liked something, and then you're drawn in to lean into it.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about temporal landmarks and temporal discounting. Elaborate, if you will, a little bit on the effects of time on behavior.
Yeah, so those are two interesting behavioral science principles that are almost like a yin and yang. So temporal landmarks is all about certain kind of inflection points in our lives where we we believe we have a fresh slate. We basically close the door on our past lives or our past selves, and we open the door to our future selves. So, New Year's Day, is a great example of that. Like we all make our New Year's resolutions, and a few weeks in, we've abandoned them. But New Year's Day is a huge one. But so are birthdays, so are anniversaries, so are Mondays. Monday's the beginning of the week. It's rare for someone to say, you know what, next Wednesday I am going to start my exercise routine. But they will say next Monday I'm going to start. So there are these times, these finite periods on the calendar. Some of them we all share, like New Year's Day. Some of them are very personal, like an individual's birthday. But there are times on the calendar where we feel, you know what, maybe I did do as well as I'd hoped before, but I have a fresh start now. This is when I'm going to do it. And at these periods of temporal landmarks, people actually feel more energized. They feel more confident that they're going to be able to achieve what it is they want to achieve. And so as a result, they might be more likely to make a purchase, to sign up for a service because they're feeling energized. They're feeling they can do this. So it's all about, the person you used to be. They're gone. The person that you are now, they're the person who's going to do it. Now, contrast that with temporal discounting. What behavioral scientists have found is people have a tendency to discount future rewards and focus on the present. You talked about present focus bias. It's very similar, right? We're much more likely to go for sooner, albeit smaller rewards than more distant later, but even larger rewards. We want what we want now. I'd take, many studies have shown you'll take $5 now versus $15 tomorrow. But then when tomorrow comes, you're like, why didn't I hold out for the $15? So in order to overcome temporal landmark, in order to overcome temporal discounting, we need to get people to understand that who they are today, the same hopes and dreams and wants and likes and dislikes, is going to be who they are tomorrow. And that's particularly important if you're in an industry where what you're selling doesn't have an immediate payoff. You go to the grocery store and you buy a bag of donuts or a beer or something or a new dress, that has a pretty immediate payoff. But if you're selling retirement funds, if you're selling insurance, if you're selling education, the payoffs are down the road, if at all. And it's really hard to get people to see themselves and to make that investment in a future payoff. And so what we have to do is we have to bridge that gap and get people to see who they are today is the same person as who they are tomorrow. Researchers have actually found that when they ran research, people thought of their future themselves as strangers. My future self is as much of a stranger to me as the guy who just drove by me on the street. Like it was really interesting when they put people into fMRI machines and watched how their brains lit up. It was like we just have no concept of who we are in the future. So on the one hand, temporal landmarks are great because it's like who you are in the past is gone. You're a new person. On the other hand, temporal discounting requires us to say who you are today is really going to be the same person you are in 3 months, in a year, in 3 years. And therefore, if you're someone today who values having enough money to do what you want to do, you're going to feel that way when you retire, and you better save some of that money so that you'll have the money to go to the movies on a Friday night on a whim. So two different halves of the same coin. Very interesting, the effects of timing on people's behavior.
Well, Nancy, I've asked you this multiple times what your favorite kind of shark is and why. And you've given great answers both times. One, it was me, which was the obvious answer. And two, it was the great white. But are you spending a lot of time in the water off the Cape up there?
Yeah, so we're here. I'm not in Cape Cod right now, but I often am in the summer, and we're really having a shark
Yeah.
issue, challenge. I don't know. I don't want to say problem because you might, that might bother you, but they just,
You've triggered me, Nancy.
it's going to trigger you. I don't want to do that. I haven't been to Nantucket, but I just read they saw a hammerhead, which I know you guys talk about a lot on your podcast. They just saw a hammerhead off of Nantucket, but I spent a lot of time in Truro, and they are routinely closing the beaches down, sometimes several times a day for an hour. And, so it's a little disconcerting. And I was reading something about the question posed in the article was, are the sharks coming in closer to the shore? And it might be because the fish that they're preying on are coming in closer to the shore. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but I always remember what you told me and what I mentioned in the book, which is, what, you just have to remember that you're in their territory and you've got to act accordingly. And so I'm still trying to enjoy my beach time, but it's never far from mine, to be honest with you.
Well, Nancy, it's that special time of the show. You've done this several times before. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
It's going to be the high point of my day, Shark.
Oh, well, you've got a low day then. You
Oh,
set the bar too high with this. All right, number 1, Hedwig von Restorff or Bluma Zagarnik? And only nerds like us will know this.
oh my goodness. All right. So von Restorff is all about things that are different standing out, and Zygarnik is all about remembering things until you complete them. So
Yeah,
um,
exactly. Isolation versus puzzles.
there you go. Perfect. I'm going to go with von Restorff. I'm a big believer in, we notice they were hardwired. We're absolutely hardwired to notice things that are different. They stand out. They stay with us. That's a great skill for a marketer to have. They're both really good, but
Agreed. I use them both in a lot of presentations because I love to show the picture of the red apple and the big bunch of green apples, and also Zagarnik with the puzzle pieces and trying to put everything together. All right, number 3. I've known you as a consultant slash speaker, but now you're spending a lot more time as an author putting out this book. Do you enjoy speaking more or writing?
ooh, that's a tough one. I enjoy both very much and for different reasons.
It's good that you even said that with writing because a lot of people find that to be too laborious and painful.
But I enjoy, I'm a copywriter by trade,
Yeah.
so I like them both. I think I just like them for different reasons.
Well, you got to pick one or the other, though. It's Sophie's choice.
Well, I suppose I spend more time writing, not necessarily writing a book, but just writing for my clients and writing to persuade people. So, if I had to choose, I think I'd go with writing. But if there are any conference organizers listening, I absolutely would love to speak for you.
Yeah, your publisher will appreciate the writing, but content organizers at conferences definitely consider her as a speaker. All right, number 3, sociology or psychology?
Ooh, psychology.
Why so?
Uh, I think it's just a little bit perhaps more tied into how the brain works, and that fascinates me.
It's the why behind the sociology. All right, number 4, you've got friends coming into Boston. They want a day to do something fun and interesting. Are you recommending they go see a Red Sox game at Fenway Park or a trip and hike on the Freedom Trail?
It depends on who the friends are, right? I mean, when my niece comes up, she's all about the Red Sox, which is great. I have other friends who are real history buffs, so it really just depends on what they're interested in because both are good choices.
If I were coming up there and hanging out, what would you choose?
I'm gonna peg you as a baseball guy, you
100%.
know? Fenway Park is classic. It's really small. You got the Green Monster. We could see a good game, have a couple of beers, maybe go out for a dinner in the Fenway Park area afterwards. I don't know. Am I wrong about this?
No, you're right. I've done the Freedom Trail. It's great,
Yep.
but I'll take Fenway Park all day long. It's just more my thing. And number 5, I've asked you biscuits or cornbread a couple times before, and your answer was cornbread, so we got to switch it up. You're not a vegetarian or vegan, are you?
I am not. No.
Okay, you're not. Good. That makes this next question a lot easier. Let's say you're having lunch or dinner down here in my part of the world. Fried catfish or fried chicken?
Fried chicken.
Why so?
I'm not a huge seafood fan, which is odd. I'm here in New England. I grew up in New England. I'm currently living in New England, and it's not that I dislike seafood, but fried chicken. Oh man, yeah, totally fried chicken. But if you had ribs on the menu,
Mm-hmm.
that would be tempting too.
Oh, yeah. I could have asked ribs or good lobster roll question, but all of them are great answers. Nancy, where can people find out more about you, get a copy of this awesome book, keep up with what you're doing and more?
So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at N Harhut, Nharhut. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook. My agency is HBT, Human Behavior Triggers, HBT Marketing. We're based here in Massachusetts. We post a lot of information on our blog, interviews, and podcast and just, keeping people up to date on what's going on in social sciences and behavioral sciences. And then, of course, my book is available at Amazon and Kogan Page and any place great books are sold. So get your copy. I'd really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Nancy, until the fourth installment that we do together, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Shark, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
So there was my third conversation with Nancy Harhut, who was previously on episodes 85 and 171, and she's a creative marketer, a behavioral scientist, a speaker, and the author of Using Behavioral Science in Marketing: Drive Customer Action and Loyalty by Prompting Instinctive Responses. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, why should marketers think about using behavioral science? It's something forgotten way too often. As much as we think that data drives the world, or Google, or social media, when you focus on the greatest content or ads ever produced, eventually what drives it more is human behavior. It drives much of the decision-making process. And as Nancy said, and I quote, "A lot of times in marketing, we forget about how people make decisions." So true. And she goes on to add that we often think that if we get the right message to the right person at the right time, then it's all going to work. But she adds that it also needs to be in the right way, i.e. brain friendly. And sometimes it's just adding that balance to get something to work. So be smart. Second, a cautionary note for all of us explaining this to our groups or our bosses or even our audiences. We quite often talk over them. A lot of the good marketing advice may even sound like inside baseball, and if you're not in air quotes inside, then you have to remember to help people solve problems. A lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, don't have time to delve into everything you may have convinced them to try. That's a good tactic or a story or whatever. I would simply caution all of us to be more practical in the use of our application of marketing words and, well, be more brain friendly. That's generally what actually resonates with people that buy your product or service. Third, storytelling is such a flippin' buzzword, but she goes on to cite a Princeton professor who reminds us that stories are great, but they have to personally resonate with the listener if you want people to act on them. And that's a good story and a good application of behavioral science. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time, and I'm so thankful to everyone who listens. Please consider writing a review. It sure would be helpful, and let me know your thoughts on the show. And I don't know if I could apply behavioral science to diving, but trust me, when I'm down there, I'm not too worried about it. So enjoy your day and don't let your worries get you down. Come dive deeper and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.